So very quickly about the journey of the Harbour School, and then we'll go into kind of some of the practical things that you can use. So I was very fortunate to take over the headship of the Harbour School. It's a special school in AP provision in Portsmouth about, a number of years ago, 6 years ago, now. And at the time, lots of fantastic things about the school. But one of the things that I found that we needed to address quite quickly was that there were a number of young people who were either not attending school regularly, or if they were attending school, they were coming in and they were putting a huge amount of their energies and efforts into trying to control and manipulate rather than actually let us have influence over them. So I did what I always do as a psychologist. I went away and I kind of researched that, and I looked at what evidence-informed approaches are there that are out there that can really make a difference to children and young people who are really struggling to engage with us. Let us have some influence over them. Let's teach them. Really, we had great teaching on offer. Some of the young people were just not allowing us to kind of help them access that learning. So I went away. I found a fabulous place in London called the Children's Centre for Mental Health, and I went on various bits of training at weekends and so on, and read various books. And I discovered a thing called PACE, which I'm going to talk to you a bit about today, and various other things about trauma-informed and attachment-aware practice. So what I would say is it kind of made the world of difference. If I share something, if that's okay, hopefully this will be relatively seamless. You'll see, as well as talking very fast, the other thing you need to know about me is that technology is not my bag, really. So I'm having to learn, but I think so far, Aziz, that's working, isn't it?
Yeah, that seems to be coming through, Ian.
So I'm hoping that's going to go from the beginning. There we go. So hopefully you all know what happens, by the way, just so you're aware, when I put this up, if I'm staring oddly at you, I no longer can see anybody else on the screen, including myself. I'm literally just looking at a slide, so that's much more comfortable for me. But if I'm doing anything strange, kind of shout at me. Okay, so why might I be interested in the PACE approach? It is evidence-based. It's interventions that work successfully with children who experience trauma. It is trauma-informed and trauma-reducing. As Aziz said in his really great introduction, thank you, Aziz, it's actually these times so pertinent. This was for children and young people who'd experienced trauma in our school, but actually so many of the children and young people at the moment will be having difficult and challenging experiences, as will we and the adults and the colleagues around us. So it is about being trauma informed. It's about practices that can be trauma reducing. I'm going to go on and explain some of those very practical things that we can put in place that make the world of difference. It works exceptionally well with children who've had adverse childhood experiences, but actually equally it works well with all children and young people. I guess, like a lot of practices for children with additional needs, they're essential and necessary practice for those children and young people, but actually they're often very good practice for all children and young people. So where they will be trauma informed and they will help children overcome that trauma, if they've been traumatized, they will actually be trauma reducing for the other children and young people as well. So it does support us, all the children and young people, to be, as I put in the third bullet point there, open and engaged, ready to learn. Again, I'll explain that a little bit more as we go through this session. And at the Harbour School, I won't talk about that for too long, but just to let you know, this is one of the things we put in place. It wasn't the only change we made, it wasn't the only development, but actually it was a really key cornerstone one, and actually it did lead to improved outcomes. It leads to all the things I've listed there: improved attendance, behaviour, attitudes, progress, outcomes, wellbeing, which is it also got externally recognised. We've got a great Ofsted evaluation. Challenge Partners, as Aziz said, came in and recognised it as an area of excellence. And I'm sorry, Aziz, to trump your Challenge Partners review, but actually Louise Bomber, I don't know if people have come across Louise Bomber. Louise is an absolute, she's fabulous, and she is a national expert in all things to do with trauma and attachment aware. She came and did a review of our school and again recognised the good practice that was happening. So don't get me wrong, it was lovely to get it from Ofsted, it was lovely to get it from Challenge Partners. Of course, it was fabulous to make a difference for the children and young people, but getting that recognition from Louise was particularly lovely. Okay, so you might be interested. What is it? The PACE approach stands for playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. Again, I'll explain that in some more detail in this session and signpost you to other information where you can find out more. Apologies, people phoning me in the background. I can't turn that one off. It's on my laptop, so that will go in a minute. Approaches, it overcomes a thing called block trust, which again I will talk about. The block trust is when those children and young people are really struggling to let us have an influence over them. So actually it is, what can we do to overcome that kind of and get back into a place where they will learn from us, where they will accept our influence. It's evidence-based. As I say, I'm a background as a psychologist, so everything I'm going to talk about today will be evidence-based. It will come mostly from psychology and neuroscience. It won't just be Ian says, it will be a number of things that hopefully will be useful and practical for you, but also have a really good evidence base to them as well. And then just to let you know what the PACE Plus approach includes: the block trust stuff, the PACE, which I'm going to talk about a bit later on, the transformative power of feeling safe. There's a fantastic thing called the polyvagal theory, again, that I will talk to you about a little bit this morning and signpost you to other information about. Then we're not going to have a lot of time to touch on today, but I will signpost you where you can find out more about it, the kind of what about where it goes wrong, the 4 R's. Also learning social emotional skills is part of the the PACE Plus approach. And I will touch briefly, because it felt wrong not to do it, on self-care, about looking after our own well-being and how important it is that we do get ourselves in the right place so we can be that secure base, we can be that safe pair of hands to look after those children and young people, both whilst the remote learning continues and as they start to return to school. It's extremely important that we look after our needs first to make sure we're in the right place for the children and young people. So I've tried to summarise that as a picture. I quite like my visual images, and I've deliberately set it up in a way that trust and safety are the foundations for learning. It's not about making a choice between focusing on trust and focusing on safety or focusing on learning for the children and young people. If we don't have the trust and the safety in place for children and young people, as you can probably picture in that image, if either one of those kind of circles goes, the learning simply falls down. So the neuroscience absolutely backs that up. If we don't feel safe and we do not have a trusting relationship with the person that is working with us, we simply will not be able to learn. The parts of our brain, the cortex, the learning parts of the brain are not available to us in order to be able to learn when we don't feel safe and when we don't have trust. So that picture, I'm going to visit various elements throughout the day, throughout this session, so all day, don't worry, throughout this hour, and then we'll kind of, so yeah, we'll do some safety, we'll do some trust, we'll do some little bits about learning, but again, I'll signpost you to more of that. So what we're going to cover, as he said, I'm talking a little bit about the harbour journey first of all. We're then going to do a bit about the transformative power of feeling safe. After that, I'll stop and let you ask some questions. I'll then do a bit about rebuilding trust and the PACE approach. Again, I'll pause then and let you ask questions. Then finally, at the end, just for 10 minutes or so, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can look after our own well-being. And there's some really interesting, again, evidence from psychology and neuroscience. There's some stuff that I think we know, but we probably don't do, which I will reference briefly. And then I will finish off with some stuff that actually we probably don't know, that the neuroscience and the psychology says we really need to do. And that's about our own well-being. So again, that's a bit of a spoiler for what's coming towards the end. I'll then signpost you to other bits of information, including the online training and where you can find that information. And we'll finish it off with some Q&A, as well as speccing that Q&A throughout. I think I've covered most of the rest of what's on that slide, in that it will be evidence-based. Some of the evidence-based approaches and interventions I'm going to talk about are deceptively simple. They are things that, think, oh, actually, that's not that complicated, but actually they're enormously powerful. So they are things that if we make an effort to use consistently and to use regularly and repeatedly with children and young people, the psychology and the neuroscience, the research shows that it really does make a difference. I think I've said already, but the sorts of things I'm going to talk about in the next 45 minutes are essential practice for children and young people who've experienced trauma. They're actually good practice, however, for all children and young people and for adults and colleagues too. The context then, and then I'll do a bit about safety. So the context, we are living in extraordinary times. If I start with the picture that you've got in front of you, this is the work of Bruce Perry, a psychiatrist, wonderful psychiatrist from America. And actually what we know from the research, if you look at that picture, is that we have this kind of pattern of stress. And if the stress, I think this is going to work, my new toy, hopefully using a little red arrow there. If the stress goes this way and we've got unpredictable, extreme and prolonged stress, then that unfortunately is the recipe. That doesn't mean it will definitely happen, but there is a likelihood that that is going to be something that will lead to sensitization and traumatization for children, young people and for adults. Sadly, that unpredictable, extreme and prolonged stress sounds horribly familiar with what a lot of us will be experiencing in these extraordinary times. There are, however, really great things that we can do to mitigate against that and make it far less likely to be traumatizing. There are also significant things that if we can move to this side and if we can support stress where possible to be more predictable, more moderate and more controllable for people, then actually rather than it be a sensitization and a traumatization, what happens then is a fabulous thing happens called resilience. And I'm not suggesting for a minute that all of us are going to end up traumatized, all of our children and people, us and our colleagues are going to end up traumatized from what's happening to us. But sadly, some of us will. Some of us will be traumatized. Some of us will be re-traumatized if we've had negative experiences before. But what we will all be is we will all be affected. So I think if we can think of ways, which I'll talk about, as I say, throughout this session, to make things less traumatizing, to be trauma-informed, to be trauma-reducing, it will help those people who have been traumatized. It will also help make it less likely that these experiences will be traumatizing for other people as well. So it's going to be largely around these things over here: thinking about what we can do, some actions we can take to make things more predictable, more moderate, and more controllable for people. But equally, alongside that, and most important of all, actually, it's going to be about relational support. The psychology and the neuroscience is extremely clear. The thing that we can do that has the most impact is we can actually support children in a relational way. Bruce Perry calls that relational buffering. So when a child or young person or a colleague is going through stress, if they can have relational support alongside that stress, and I'll go into some detail about what that relational support best looks like, if we can provide relational support for those children and young people alongside that stress, that in itself reduces it hugely and makes it far more likely to be something that will build resilience rather than something that will build sensitization and traumatization. The sad reality, of course, is that providing that relational support, that social connection, is a real challenge at these times. And that makes it even more likely that people, alongside their unpredictable, extreme and prolonged stress, will have the kind of lack of social connection and relational support and that relational buffering. So some of the things I want to talk about today, as I say, super simple, but actually really important that we put them in place. And in some ways, more challenging than ever to get them in place at this moment in time. So bear with me, we'll talk about some other things going forward and go from there. Okay, hopefully you're with me so far. Talking to a bit of a blank screen, and that won't let me change slides. Why is that? Aziz, can you still hear me?
Yeah, can hear you finely, and I know sometimes there is a delay in switching between the slides.
Yeah, it for some reason my cursor stopped me from clicking. I think it wants to be. It wants to use my pen. You see, I've got a new toy. How to use it. It was always high risk, wasn't it? Okay, it's seamless. It's seamless. Thankfully, no one's watching, and it's not live, and it's not being recorded, and it's all good. Okay. I'm going to start with safety then, if that's okay. And once I've talked about safety for about the next 10 minutes or so, then I'm going to stop. Then I'll give you the opportunity to ask me questions. Safety is absolutely fundamental. It's one of those foundation stones of helping learning happen. When we feel safe, we are in our window of tolerance. The window of tolerance is kind of our comfort zone, really. So once we're within that kind of comfort zone, within that window of tolerance, what happens is all the great things in life happen. We can learn, we can socialize, we can reflect, we mostly feel good, we can deal with emotions as they do come up, we can keep ourselves regulated. All of the great things about being alive and being happen when we're in that kind of window of tolerance. We all have it. It's there for all of us, and it'll be different for each of us, different shapes, unique windows of tolerance, depending on our kind of life experiences. That when we get tipped outside of that window of tolerance, we will go into a completely different autonomic nervous system state. So rather than being open and engaged, that kind of really kind of able to engage, able to support, able to be involved in things and learn and socialize, actually we get tipped into one of two different kind of autonomic nervous system states. We either get tipped into a fight or flight state, which is a kind of mobilized response to a perceived threat, or we get tipped into an immobilized response to perceived threat, and we go into a freeze and collapse. We're not choosing to do that. It's not a conscious thing. Our brain is constantly scanning the environment, making a decision about whether we're safe or whether we're not safe. And then if it feels we're not safe and it's picking up cues of not being safe, it will tip us into one of those two. If it feels it's something that makes a decision in the brain that it's something that we can fight off, it will prepare us to fight and flight and be able to kind of fight off or run away from that danger. If it thinks it is danger that is very severe and we're not going to be able to either fight it off or run away from it, if it perceives that, it may not be the reality, but if it perceives that it's that level of threat, we go into a kind of frozen and collapsed, dissociated, withdrawn. Rather than becoming oppositional and aggressive, we actually become withdrawn, dissociated, rigid, distant. And for all of us, hopefully, we spend the majority of our time in our window of tolerance, in that open engaged state, and only occasionally get tipped into a fight, flight, or a freeze and collapse response. And when we do, hopefully, we've got strategies that we can use to bring ourselves back into our window of tolerance and very quickly come back into that much more positive, open and engaged state. The reason why I'm sharing that is that when we are under stress, which clearly we all are at the moment, our window of tolerance naturally reduces. So if we're under significant stress, I think we recognise this hopefully from our own personal experience, our window of tolerance reduces at that time, and it's more likely that things that wouldn't normally tip us into a different autonomic nervous system state, that fight, flight, or that freeze and collapse, can tip us much more easily out of our window of tolerance and into those different states. As I say, when we're in those states, interpret the world differently, we interact with the world differently. We certainly can't learn, because in both of those states that are outside of being open and engaged, the cortex effectively goes offline, the lower parts of the brain, the limbic system and the brainstem take over. We're not in a state where we can socialize, we're not in a state where we can learn. We need to help children, young people and ourselves to stay in that window of tolerance and to return to it quickly when we possibly can. So under stress it reduces, which is a sad reality. Thankfully, when that stress goes away, for most of us, it will expand again. A sad reality of traumatization, however, is that two really key things happen, which I think it's useful to understand. The first is that reduction in the window of tolerance, rather than it going away again when the stress goes away, the reduction in the size of the window of tolerance actually stays with us for a longer period of time. I'll talk to you in a minute about some good news, because we can change that and re-expand it. But actually, it stays, the trauma, one of the traumatization effects is that it stays reduced. So we're more likely to be tipped out of our window of tolerance more readily, as if we are stressed all of the time, that kind of hypervigilance. And the second things that happens is we also end up, if we've been traumatized, with an overactive alarm system. So the amygdala towards the bottom of our brain, the kind of is constantly scanning the environment to see if we are safe or to see if we're not safe. And if it perceives that we're not safe, it tips us out of that. Now, that alarm system, that amygdala, that scanning for safety, becomes overactive. It becomes a sensitized stress response in children, young people and adults who've experienced trauma, that kind of toxic stress over a long period of time. So you get a reduced window of tolerance, and you also get a sensitized stress response. And as you can probably imagine, and you're probably already thinking of some of the children and young people that you work with, that makes it far less likely that you can stay within your window of tolerance, within your open and engaged state, where you can socialize effectively, where you can engage with people, where you can learn all those great things. And what tends to happen with people that are traumatized, rather than spending the majority of their time in an open and engaged state, they tend to oscillate between a fight-flight state and a freeze-collapse state, with only limited time in between, sadly, in their open and engaged state. So the strategies I'm going to be talking about for the next half hour or so are very much about what can we do to help young people stay more within that open and engaged state, even if they have got that reduced window of tolerance and that overactive alarm system. And then also, what strategies can we use, which thankfully are similar strategies over time, that will help them re-expand that window of tolerance and become more neurotypical again, so return to a more desensitized stress response, one that isn't miscuing and misinterpreting and over-responsive, hypervigilant. So those are the sorts of strategies we're going to talk about. What I've put there on the slide is I've called it the intentionally increasing cues of safety. So what we're talking about here, I need to put on my pen again, is we're talking about this bit on the right hand side, the work of Stephen Porges, again, wonderful psychiatrist and neuroscientist, and the little red dot on the brain that you've got there, that's your amygdala. That's the bit that's scanning for safety. The work of Stephen Porges, a thing called neuroception, is that kind of, we are scanning the environment all the time for safety. That kind of amygdala, the red dot in your brain, tiny little bit, very, very important, makes all the difference. It scans the environment and works out, am I safe, am I not safe, and then makes a decision subconsciously. We don't make a choice of it. It's not a cortex thing. It happens automatically, subconsciously. It makes a decision. Am I staying safe? Therefore, I can be that green person in that open engaged state, or do I need to respond to threat, perceived threat, and go into one of my two defensive modes? The really great news, and it sounds simple, but it has an enormous impact, is the most powerful thing that we can do to help people feel safe is we can give cues of safety through our non-verbal communication. So the elements, the research done by Stephen Porges demonstrates that actually even more powerful than threat, to actually give people a reduction and a sense of safety, they feel safe, is actually how we communicate through our non-verbal. So the neuroception scans the environment all the time to say, am I safe, am I not safe? And actually clearly one of the things that is most dangerous to people is other people. So we have evolved to subconsciously scan the other people in our environment and make a decision subconsciously, unconsciously. Are they safe? You'll be doing that to me now. You'll be scanning my face, you'll be working out. And the sorts of cues that we pick up on without being aware of it is we pick up on cues of smiling. If muscles in our face are tense and we've got a flat facial expression, we will perceive that as an unsafe cue. If the person is smiling, if the person has got relaxed facial muscles, if they've got prosody, if they've got intonation in their voice, if their gestures are genuine, if their posture is relaxed, if they don't look tense, we pick up on those cues, and they are the things that help us stay within that open and engaged, that window of tolerance. So the very first thing that we need to do is intentionally make an effort. Even if we're doing remote work with a child or young person, ideally still have some visual contact through some sort of connection, if not over the phone or whatever, because clearly it doesn't work brilliantly through emails and texts. But if we do, we really need to try and find a way to interact and have those non-verbal elements of communication. Sounds super simple, but exaggerating and really thinking about our cues of safety make the world of difference in helping that child or young person or colleague or partner to feel safe. Okay, so I'm going to pause in just a second, Aziz. So just if people want to start thinking about any questions they've got. So the first foundation stone is about felt safety. The most significant thing we can do to help children and young people feel safe is really think about our non-verbal communication. I've made that sound simple. However, at this time, and I will talk a little bit more towards the end of this session, it's quite a challenge because we're probably going to be stressed ourselves. We're probably not naturally going to be relaxed and smiling and have prosody in our voice. We might have more of a kind of monotone voice because we're feeling anxious and stressed ourselves, and we become tense. So we need to think about looking after ourselves, getting ourselves in a place where we can do those safety cues, those cues of safety for our non-verbal communication to children. A couple of quotes, and then I'll stop for questions. So just to kind of hopefully summarise some of the things I've talked about, a quote from Karen Treisman that I particularly love, that relationships are the most powerful mental health intervention known to mankind. So Karen Treisman is a psychologist, and I just love that. Actually, it's the relationships that make the world of difference, and the really key parts of relationships are the trust and the safety. I've talked to you a little bit about some of the headline stuff from safety. I'll do trust after we've done questions. The good news from Bruce Perry is that repeated experience of predictable, moderate and controllable stress, very importantly, with relational buffering, not only supports the young person to feel safe at that moment in time, but repeated experience of relational buffering alongside moderate stress, that's the bit that actually re-expands the young person's window of tolerance, or the adult's window of tolerance, once they've been traumatized, and it also desensitizes the overactive stress response. So as Stephen Porges, who developed the polyvagal theory that I've just kind of summarized, actually it's the experience of safety that is the treatment. If we can give safe social interactions as experiences to children and young people, especially the non-verbal elements of that, they are the bits that will help children and young people feel safe and come back from that traumatized experience to be able to interact more with us. Okay, I'm going to stop the slides there, Aziz, if that's okay, and just pause for a moment to see if anybody has any questions.
Thank you, Ian. That's great, and yeah, incredible detail. And as you mentioned, it's the deceptively simple things but done right that does have the biggest impact. I'm just going to wait. We've not had any kind of questions come through, but I'll just give anyone an opportunity for any clarification or any questions that they'd like to ask at this stage. And Ian, I'll just kick off. One of the pre-submitted questions was, I guess, in relation to what you've discussed, whether the approach is, in your experience, is consistent across young people of all abilities, or whether that there is a more nuanced approach needed for people that maybe do have profound mental and learning health difficulties, or how that approach maybe you changed your approach depending on the kind of cohort of young people.
Thanks, Aziz. A nice, simple question, just to kind of really. It's a huge question. It's a great question, but it's a huge question. I mean, the approaches that I'm talking about today are they are approaches that are really important for children and young people who've had adverse childhood experiences, children with social, emotional, mental health, children who and young people who have had those kind of challenging experiences, which a number sadly will be having at this moment. So I think they're approaches that are absolutely necessary for those children and young people. But as I said, they're good practice for all children and young people. They help us all to feel safe and in a place for learning. The sad reality is, if children come into school and they don't feel safe, therefore they're not able to learn, you actually end up with a learning gap, because you've got great teaching on offer, which is exactly what's happening in the Harbour School. But if the children and young people are not in a place to access that learning, then they won't be the ones making learning. The children that feel safe will make the progress. It goes that way, doesn't it? The children and young people that are making kind of with us and feeling safe will make the progress. Those that won't are not in a place where they're learning, so they won't. Clearly, as schools, we're extremely good at meeting individual needs and thinking about adapting. So I guess I would encourage people, which goes a little bit away from your question, to think about what I've just shared and think about how that works for them. How would they, manage to build this in to their practice? Hopefully, it's reassuring that some of these things are done already, but it helps us to consciously think about them and think about how we can adapt and move forward. But even children and people with complex learning needs will be picking up on those cues of safety from our interactions with them, and our non-verbal communication is a very basic part of the brain that kind of does that. Okay.
Great.
Well, carry on if you want to.
Yeah, I'm just looking. Yeah, we don't. Nothing's coming through so far. So yeah, if you want
must be so happy, is he? So I'll keep going.
Great, thank you, Ian.
Thanks, mate. Do post your questions if you want to. Okay, the next bit I'm going to focus on is trust. And this is the, as I've said already, this is the other foundation stroke cornerstone of learning. And this is going to have a visual representation. Because I've decided to use my new toilets to pen, it means I'm struggling to switch between showing the slideshow and showing myself. As easy, if I do something visual, are people going to be able to see me well enough to actually get the visual aspect of the kind of blocked trust, or is that going to be tiny, small in the corner of the screen?
It might be good if you to stop sharing your slides, Ian, and then be able to.
Sorry, this is the outtakes, guys. So apologies, because I've gone to my pen, it won't let me do that. My cursor's no longer working, so I don't think, unless my pen will click on stop sharing, it won't. I haven't got a way of doing that, unfortunately. I don't think.
You're back now, Ian. Sorry.
Back?
Yeah.
You can see me now, can you?
That's right. Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. That's exactly what I wanted. So I think if I end show there. And come back to here, apologies, then I can see you can see me. Okay, that's exactly what I wanted to do. So the bit about trust I want to explain, the reason I wanted to come back for you to see me just for a moment, and I'll go back to slides a bit later, is that it's really well represented with kind of 2 glasses of water. That seems a bit weird, but there's this thing called blocked trust. And as I talk to you about blocked trust, I'm guessing that it'll probably make you think of some children and young people that you're working with. So blocked trust happens for children and young people when they've had challenging experiences, and it's part of what can happen when children and young people are traumatized. So if we think of these 2 cups, one of these cups represents the child, and the other cup represents a kind of caring adult, which could be any one of you guys. And what happens throughout a child's life is they get into this wonderful serve and return interaction between themselves and caring adults. So that happens right from early childhood. The baby cries, trying not to spill this away from my laptop, and the adult comes along, works out what's going on for the baby, and kind of responds in kind. As the child gets older, there might be something exciting that happens at school that they want to tell you about, so they would come in and tell your very supportive, kind, good enough, caring teacher that there's something that they want to, and you would respond, and they get these kind of, we might also initiate interactions. You get the feel, you get this wonderful serve and return interaction, and that's when development happens, really healthy. We need that throughout our lives for healthy development. The difficulty for children and young people who develop a thing called blocked trust is that, sadly, rather than the cup being held in the usual way, the cup ends up getting held like that. So effectively, they build a barrier, they build a wall around themselves to protect themselves from further harm. And then, as you can imagine, once they have this blocked trust, this wall, they stop reaching out and seeking kind of serve and return interactions with us as good enough caring adults. And when we have a good enough kind of caring adult, when one of us is available to them, you can see what's going to happen. It's going to get a bit messy if we do try to have those interactions. So what that looks like is children and young people that don't respond to us in the way that other children and young people usually would. It looks like children and young people that try and control us, that try and manipulate, that don't. I don't know if that makes you think of particularly young people that you've got in your school. And what happens is those children and young people do not feel safe. They don't trust us. And because they don't trust us and they don't feel safe, they try and help themselves to feel safe by taking control of the situation. And so we end up with a situation where we are desperately trying to help and support children and young people, but actually they're not allowing us to. The great news is, again, there is a very practical, wonderful intervention that we can use over time called PACE that, again, starts to wear away and chip away, and it starts to help the child or young person to be able to remove that blocked trust and overcome that situation and get back into a serve and return situation. It's extremely important that we do. One of the reasons why it's extremely important we do for all learning is it's also really important for relational learning, for social emotional learning, because actually relational skills are learnt in relationships. And if somebody is blocked to relationships, that they will not be able to learn those relational skills. So you end up with children and young people who are incredibly emotionally illiterate, socially emotionally immature, because they're not engaging in relationships to be able to develop those skills. So they've learned this strategy to protect themselves from harm, from experiences they've had in their past, but clearly it's not a strategy that's serving them particularly well. It's not a great strategy to try and cut yourself off from other people as a 50-year-old man. It's certainly not a great strategy as a child or young person, because you simply don't learn those social emotional skills. So we can use PACE. I'll just tell you in a minute. I'll go back to my slides and I'll share with you a little bit about what PACE is. But just before I do, this is the work of a guy called Dan Hughes, again, wonderful psychologist. And he works in America with children and young people who've ended up being adopted young people. And what he recognises is pretty much exactly what I've just tried to describe that we see in schools too, that children and young people have had these difficult childhood experiences. They end up in an incredibly caring, adoptive home, and they've got good enough care available to them from their new parents. But actually what he recognises recognised is that they were not able to access it. And so he developed the PACE approach to be used by kind of foster and adoptive parents to be able to wear down that mistrust, get them back into a serve and return interaction. So it was originally developed for children, young people and families and parents, but it works just as well in schools. So there's no reason. Children have the same issue, don't they? If we use that PACE approach, we can help children, again, get back into that serve and return interaction kind of going forward. So Aziz, if it's okay at that point, I'll go back to my slides and I'll just show you some bits about PACE. And we'll go from there. So this should let me. I did warn you that I wasn't great with technology, but it seems to be doing okay so far. There we go, from current slide. Okay. So hopefully you've now got a slide up in front of you that talks about the one we just finished, which was about the quotes regarding safety, and now we're going into trust. Was that gone back? No, that's gone back. Sorry, we need to go back a couple of slides. Where do we need to go? That's the one. Okay, so the very bottom of this slide, the bit about trust, the PACE approach and rebuilding trust. So I've talked to you about a little bit about what blocked trust is. PACE stands, as I said, for playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. What I will do again at the end of this presentation is I'll signpost you to some online training. One of the courses, one of the second session of a kind of long course that's free and online, you can all access that. Talks specifically about PACE, it introduces it in some more detail, and then it also goes on to show you where you can get more information about it. So it's going to be a bit whistle stop now, but there is more information you can find about it. So the playfulness of PACE involves some jokes and banter, but most importantly, it also involves the kind of non-verbal elements that I've already talked about, that kind of non-verbal elements of being light-touched, smiling, joking, laughing. The acceptance elements of PACE is around the showing the young person that we will listen to them, that what they share with us is accepted, that we will value that. We'll use our kind of active listening skills for that young person to feel as though they are accepted, they are listened to. It doesn't mean that we won't sometimes have to correct a child or young person's behaviour. We don't just let them get away with everything, but actually they will be listened to. And again, one of the online training course sessions that is available to you actually is all about kind of how we correct children. What about when it goes wrong? So again, there's more information on that. Curiosity is wanting to get to know the young person, spending time asking them questions, sharing, getting to know, being curious, all those elements. And then most important of all is the empathy stage of PACE. So the most powerful thing about paceful interactions that we can have with children and young people is empathy. And the best thing that I learned from Dan Hughes, it works incredibly well, is to slow down the empathy stage. One of the things that I am prone to do is that I will listen to a young person. I'm quite good at that. I will show a little bit of empathy, and I will rush very quickly into either reassuring them or into problem solving to try and make them better by working with them. And again, there's more information about problem solving in the longer online course. But the empathy stage, it really makes a lot of difference if we just slow that down. So rather than rushing into problem solving and reassurance, which we will need to get to, we will need to go there at some point a bit further down the line with the young person, but just slowing down and staying with the empathy stage and just doing that bit of saying, gosh, I'm so glad you told me that. That must have been hard to share. Now that you've told me, I know you better, I can help better, I can, support. So, being able to say, gosh, that sounds stressful for you, or tell me a bit more about, just sticking with that curiosity and empathy stage of a paceful interaction for a little bit longer makes an enormous difference. The other things to say about PACE, by the way, is that it's not an intervention in the sense that you take a child off to do 10 minutes of PACE once a week. It's not like you would with some interventions. Actually, what PACE is something that you try and use with children and young people in your interactions. So a child or young person, when we are having interactions with them, we try where possible to introduce elements of pacefulness, PACE elements into those interactions. We can't do PACE all the time. We can't be paceful in every interaction, but the more interactions we have with a child and young person that are paceful or have elements of PACE, the more it will help them overcome that blocked trust. And gradually over time, we wear down that blocked trust, and they move from not trusting us to thinking, well, maybe I can start to trust this guy a bit. And we'll see that change in their behavior where they start to allow us to have some influence over them. They start to work with us rather than trying to control us and those sorts of elements. And then eventually they get to the point where they really do trust us, and we've got a proper kind of working alliance that we can move forward with that one person going forward. Okay, that's a super whistle-stop tour introduction to PACE. Hopefully some of that's reassuring, but also gives you things to look at as well. A couple of quotes, and then again, I'll throw it open for questions if that's okay. So a quote from Louise Bomber, who I mentioned earlier. She talks about every relationship having the power to change everything that's been before. So actually, we can make an enormous difference. Our relationships that we have with children, young people, can help them to feel safe, help them to have trust, therefore help them to go on and learn. Those things, we have such an opportunity to have those powerful relationships that make a difference. Karen Treisman, psychologist, talks about every interaction being an intervention. That's the bit that I was talking about in terms of pace not being something that you take off and do with a child for 10 minutes. Those interactions that we have throughout the time with the young person, they're the paceful interactions, they're the bit that make the difference. We can do those through our non-verbal and our paceful elements. And then Dan Hughes, the guy who actually developed pace, and he talks about wearing down children's muscle trust over time. So having one paceful interaction isn't going to be necessarily the thing that will make a difference, but a number of paceful interactions over time will build trust, will wear down blocked trust, and children and young people will be back with us kind of going forward. Again, Aziz, if it's okay, I'm going to pause there and just take any questions. I think somebody also might have their microphone on. I think everyone else can hear that as well, but if somebody just could check that you have got your microphone muted, because I think somebody's having a can of Coke or something equivalent, which is making me quite jealous. Okay, let's stop sharing and do some questions. So hopefully if I do that again, end show, and go back to here, you'll be able to see me properly. And Aziz, are you okay to see if there's any questions that come in?
Yeah, that's great, Ian. Thank you. And again, really, interesting amount of research and work that's gone into that. There's no questions coming through just at the minute, but I'll just give a couple of minutes just as a pause. I know that obviously we have covered quite a lot of content, so I'll just give a couple of minutes before we move on to the next section. I wonder, Ian, talking about in the meantime, just talking about rebuilding trust with young people and how important that is, whether you had any specific examples from your time at the Harbour or in other roles where any obstacles that you faced in doing that, and any techniques, any tips in terms of rebuilding that trust with young people.
So it will be slightly different with different young people, but yeah, let's use an example, Aziz. So a young girl who came to us, she was about 13 when she first came to our school. She sadly had not been able to be in school for an extremely long period of time. She had been through, I think when she first came to us, about 15 different foster homes. She had a very troubled childhood, lovely girl, but really, really troubled. The very first day that she came into school, she was so stressed and so not feeling safe and so trying to control us. That trust and safety really was not there for her at all. Despite our best efforts to make this transition successful, she'd bounced through so many places and been rejected so many times. She just didn't believe that we were going to stick with her. So sadly, her first day in school didn't end fantastically well. She did do quite a bit of damage. She did kick and hurt a number of people. But actually, what we clearly needed to do was build that trust and that safety. So the very next day, we did a home visit. She was quite shocked by that. She thought she was going to be in trouble. We used our paceful interactions. We made it very clear that we wanted to listen to her, that we empathised, that we understood the day had been we used language like stressful for you. I'd been kicked, I had my bruises. We weren't going there. That wasn't what the visit was about. She thought she was going to be told off and told she could never come back to school. And eventually she did come and join us down around the kitchen table in the new home. And actually she did start to engage, but that was only at the point when we'd given her lots of reassurance that this wasn't me coming to take revenge on her, to tell her off severely for what she'd done. Clearly we got the message across that we didn't want that behaviour and it wasn't appropriate, but we clearly needed to think very carefully about different ways of working. But we wanted to do that with her. We wanted to build a relationship, and we put together a plan with her and with her foster carers to think about how we could gradually step those things forward over time. And it was a long journey. She's been with us for a couple of years. She's made enormous progress. She's built fantastic relationships with adults, and she's now starting to build relationships with children and young people too. The playfulness of pace that became kind of a thing for her was that she was very big time into fashion, and she would change her kind of fashion identities quite regularly. This is probably awful to say, but she did actually share with me one of the reasons why sometimes she would break down a foster placement is that sometimes she'd learned that if she went to a new foster placement, they'd spend lots of money on her and get new clothes. So sometimes it was about her being motivated so she was very into fashion, very much kind of, we obviously tapped into that, and she would wear the most incredible kind of clothes and have the most incredible things. So it gave me the opportunity to take an interest in joining her where she was at, and the playfulness became some over time, not immediately because she didn't trust me enough to start with, but it became something that would be a kind of playful thing between us and her. I would say, at the weekend I thought of you because I saw this person with this amazing handbag. It had long black tassels on it, and she'd kind of go, "Oh, Ian, you don't know anything about fashion. That's horrible. I'd hate that." We would have that, and it tended over time to become and me kind of noticing things about her fashion sense, taking an interest, sharing those sorts of things that helped me keep her in mind, etc. Thinking about kind of showing things and taking an interest in things that she was interested in, and her mostly taking, I shouldn't swear, but taking the piss out of me, which was fine. I'm quite comfortable with that. The fact that I had no fashion sense and I was scruffy, and that, you know, she, bless her, in the end, for Christmas one year, she actually bought me some conditioner. That's how far the banter went. To go, you need to look after your hair better, and you know. So we built this relationship through those paceful interactions over time. It started very much with the empathy, seeing what she's at, working with her, being curious, being empathic. Clearly, there were boundaries, there were limits we had to set, there were things we had to do. But that's an example, as how that over time, it doesn't have to be that extreme, but actually those paceful interactions really do help children, young people overcome that block trust. She's now making fantastic progress. She's doing a course in hair and beauty, and a course in fashion and those bits going forward. So, you know, that couldn't possibly have happened a couple of years ago. She's also been through, sadly, about another dozen or so foster placements in that time, but hopefully she'll be more stable in that environment. At least as a school, we've been able to be her secure base and her consistent 3 or 4 key adults that she's built relationships, myself being one, over the last 2 years. At least we are there for her. The other thing I guess I would just add in at that point is that one of the things that Louise Bomber recognises through her work is those kind of key adult relationships are really, really important for children and young people. So using pace and cues of safety in those key relationships are really, really important. And actually, if we can, and schools, this is really tough for schools, but there's something really quite magical about those relationships lasting for about 18 months or even longer. And I know in schools that's a real challenge, because actually we're set up to have relationships with children and young people that often last for about 9 months. For children and people that have really experienced trauma and have had challenges, the relationship of the key adults really needs to be a bit longer than that if we possibly can. If we can, we need those kind of 18-month or even longer kind of key adult relationships. Easy for me to say, much harder to achieve, I know, but those key adult relationships for a longer period of time do make an enormous difference. Is that okay, Aziz?
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. That's really interesting to hear the personal perspective. And I think, as you mentioned, it's about a kind of bespoke approach and understanding that young person, I think, which is really key to take.
Working out where they're at, joining them where they're at, slowly walking alongside them, being a fellow traveller, as Louise Bomber would describe it, which I think is a powerful language. Shall I flick back to the next bit?
Please do, Ian. Yeah, when you're ready, please do.
Okay, yeah, let's do that. I think I'm learning this now. He said slightly overconfidently, as it probably goes wrong. From current slide. Okay, a few more slides then, guys. This is about now our own well-being, and I made reference at the start of the introduction of this that actually we need to be that secure base for the children and young people. All the things I've talked about so far in terms of us needing to be in a trusting and safe relationship with a young person, we've got to be in the right place for that to happen. And there are 2 elements that I'm going to talk about with this for about 10 minutes, as if that's okay. The first is stuff that I think we know, but we probably don't do. And the second, which I think is even more interesting, I've handled the first bit now with faint praise, haven't I? But the bit that I'll spend more time on, because I think it is stuff that we probably don't know, or most of us don't know, but we need to know. And not only do we need to know it, we need to actually do it, because it makes a huge difference, and the science absolutely backs it up. So the bit that I will do super quick, because I think we know it, but the challenge I would give to people listening to this is we probably know it, but do we actually do it? So the first bit is those 5 ways of well-being. So there was a meta-analysis about 10 years ago now of hundreds of studies, high-quality studies, looking at what are the interventions that make the biggest difference for our well-being and our emotional well-being. And there were 5 things in no particular order that came out. I think we know this, but it is about being physically active, looking after ourselves physically, connecting with others, spending time with people that we care about and that care about us, that are kind of, so connecting with others in that kind of positive sense. Keeping learning is a third one. So in the top 5, keeping learning was one of those top 5. If only, Aziz, there was a wonderful online training course that was freely available to people around trauma at this time when it's really useful. Oh, maybe that, yeah, okay, I'll signpost you to that. So keep learning, whatever that learning is. Through lockdown, maybe it's a really good time to learn the new skill or to think about new things you can learn. Giving to others, we've got that one covered. As people working in schools, you'll be doing lots of giving to others. So that's one that again, the research demonstrates is a really effective way. And then the 5th one is being mindful. Mindfulness, and I'm really sorry I haven't got time to go in huge detail about this today, but again, on the online training course that I keep banging on about, the 3rd session is all about the magic of mindfulness, and the fact that mindfulness is a superpower. Being mindful and practicing mindfulness over time actually is proven to help us to become more focused, less mind wandering, and more able to recover from stressful situations. who wouldn't benefit from being more focused and being able to actually recover from stressful situations more quickly? It makes us more self-aware, more able to regulate. So I would really encourage, if you don't already practice mindfulness, I haven't got time to go into it in detail today, but there's a whole session of it within the course with lots of signposting, so that's not a bad place to start. And of course, if you're going to be mindful, it's no good just reading about it, you need to actually do it. So on the third session of the online course, it's all about mindfulness. There's lots of examples of mindful practice that you can have a go at and see if that works for you. Okay, so I think those 5 things are probably things that we know, they're quite well known, but actually my challenge would be, do we do them? I think for those of us working in the education sector, and I've had the pleasure to work with thousands of people across my career, what I tend to find is that, and it is a bit anecdotal this, but I think it probably is true, is that actually we're not that great at looking after ourselves. We're very good at adapting and trying to look after everyone around us. But when it comes to self-care and looking after us on those 5 things that I've just talked about and other things that we can do as well, we tend to not do that since they get neglected. Or if we do it, we save it for the holidays or the weekends or possibly the evenings. But actually that isn't what the research shows us we need to do. So my first challenge to you is, those are the 5 things. We probably know it. Do we actually do it? So please do make an effort to do those things. We need to be in the place to be able to look after those children and young people. They need us. We need to look after ourselves, so we're there for them. The second bit I'm going to spend slightly longer on is a thing that I don't think we necessarily all do know from research, but we really, really need to know, and we really need to practice it. And that's represented in these graphs on the right-hand side. So these, again, are from the work of psychiatrist Bruce Perry. And the bottom graph, again, if I can try and use my pen, oops, now I've done that, can I go back? Previous, sorry. Okay, so the graph, if I start with this bottom graph, along the bottom axis of that graph, kind of wobbly line, is the time throughout the day, and up the top of this is the level of physiological arousal. The blue line is a representation of a person. It's not all going to be like this, but it just gets the message across. A person who is not got a sensitized stress response, a person that has an expanded window of tolerance, a person that is what Bruce has called neurotypical, so they're not traumatized. And what happens is that stress throughout the day kind of starts off relatively low. We're able to be open and engaged, and actually it builds and builds and builds. And then what happens in this example is that lunchtime comes and we take a bit of a break at lunchtime and we reset our physiological arousal. So we're starting to get a bit disengaged, and therefore we reset ourselves, and then stress builds again through the afternoon. We go home in the evening, and hopefully we do things to look after ourselves in the evening if we possibly can, and then we kind of reset. So that's the sort of pattern that we can get into. For people with a sensitized stress response, they start, that's the red line, they start at a higher level of arousal anyway. They're already hypervigilant, they've already got that kind of sensitized stress response. They will miscue, they will misinterpret things. And then the stress for them builds even more rapidly, and quickly they get out of this open and engaged state into either a state of fight, flight, or freeze and collapse, which is the alarm and the fear states. And they will quickly not be in a place where they can learn, not be in a place where they can engage. Maybe for some young people, they then get a break at lunchtime. I know for some young people that I work with, they find lunchtime incredibly stressful, so that isn't necessarily a break for them. But then, the stress builds again. You get the feel. So, we kind of have stress that builds in small chunks. This graph then becomes really interesting. So it's the same thing again. We've got the same access. We've got the time throughout the day along the bottom. We've got the level of physiological arousal at the top. And the difference here is that what this person is consciously doing is they are taking options themselves to take mini physiological regulation breaks throughout the day. So as the day gets stressful, they are doing something here to physiologically down-regulate themselves, and they are interjecting regulation breaks throughout the day. So rather than waiting till lunchtime or the evening, or even worse, the holidays, don't get me wrong, keep doing your stuff in the holidays, keep recharging your batteries, but actually what the research really backs up that we really, really need to do, and we need to support children and young people to do as well, is whether we're sensitized or not, we actually need to take those physiological breaks to down-regulate ourselves at regular intervals throughout the day. In an ideal world, we just take a minute or two, that's enough often. We don't need long breaks. The research shows that 1, 2, possibly 3 minutes of physiological regulation, I'll talk to you about what that means in just a second, throughout the day, built into our routines, helps us to keep that physiological regulation down. And it stops all of us, whether we're sensitized or not, ending up kind of up here, in this kind of sensitized, overly kind of reactive, fight, flight, freeze, collapse, physiological state where we're outside of our window of tolerance and we really can't cope and things are overwhelming. So let me go over to this bit over here. I'm getting a bit carried away with my pen now, so I'll put it down. There are 3 things from research that are the most effective ways of taking those physiological regulation breaks in little brief bursts throughout the day. The first and the most important of all, if you don't do anything else from this hour of listening to me, use your breathing. So actually calming breathing activities are enormously powerful for down-regulating our physiological arousal. So if we want to help ourselves stay within our window of tolerance proactively, or to get back into our window of tolerance once we've been tipped outside of it, we need to think very carefully about those activities we can take. The breathing activity, slow, calm breathing, making a really conscious effort to breathe in slowly and breathe out slowly, especially a slow out breath. So I've called that 7-11 breathing here. That's just one example of many. That's breathing into the count of 7, breathing out to the count of 11, and taking a minute or two to just take the time, breathing in slowly, breathing out slowly, especially that slow out breath. What that does is that sends messages to our brain that things are calm, that things are relaxed, that we are safe, and it starts to relax our physiological response. So I mentioned earlier Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory. The vagal nerve is the nerve that connects the brain to all of the organs within our body. This is the science bit. So switch off for a couple of seconds if you're not interested in that, but hopefully some of you are. So the vagal nerve is, hence the name polyvagal in the theory, is the nerve that connects all of our organs from our brain. So when we are getting stressed, getting aroused, we think we need to do something something threatening, that is the nerve that we send messages down to, and it gets our heart rate going faster, it gets our breathing speeding up, it shuts off our gut, it gets us ready for action, or to freeze and collapse and try and survive in a kind of frozen type of way. So but equally importantly, that nerve actually is a sensory nerve too. So it's 20% motor nerve, 80% sensory nerve, and it actually senses what's going on in our organs and communicates that information to our brains. So the one organ that we can take some conscious control of is our lungs. If we take the time to consciously slow down our breathing, people don't even necessarily need to know we're doing it. We can do it quite subtly, and particularly make the effort to have that slow, even breathing in, slow, even out breath, breathing in, elongated out breath, doing that even breathing for even a minute or two. Try it. It makes the world of difference. Those are the physiological breaks that sends calming messages, because effectively what's happening in terms of our evolutionary survival is if we are breathing deeply and slowly, the messages going up to our brain are, well, you can't be under threat. You're not running away from something. You're not overly active. You're not in a kind of dissociated state of kind of food. So actually, if we're breathing in a relaxed way, it's a physiological hack that sends a message to our brain that we are able to be relaxed, we are safe. So please use that, and encourage the children and young people to learn and use that too, to do it proactively, to reduce throughout the day, those breaks throughout the day. But also, if we are getting stressed and we want to bring somebody back down into their window of tolerance, breathing is a great way of doing that. The second of 3 ways of doing this is, fancy psychology language, somatosensory breaks. That really comes from occupational therapy rather than psychology. So what that means is actually doing physical and sensory activities that calm and soothe and ground our bodies. So the sorts of things that includes is rhythmic movements. So I used to be an infant school teacher, and one of the things we used to do at transitions with children and young people, and I would join in, so we would all be getting regulation breaks, is when we had a transition from one activity to another, I would read or say a rhyming story. Kids used to love things like "We're going on a bear hunt," and we would act that out as we moved from one place to another. So as they were coming back from one activity, or as they were moving between one transition and another, they would get that kind of rhythmic physical activity. With older young people, we use music. There might be some bits of dancing, there might be some yoga, there might be some plank going on, some kind of, you will find your own creative ways of doing that. But those kind of grounding, soothing, rhythmical books and things that you can use to help, again, regularly throughout activities. I would encourage people to think about building that into transitions, doing it with the children and young people, build it into your daily routine. Perhaps when you have a comfort break, which I know in itself is difficult enough to get for a child, but spend a bit of time doing a quick bit of hand massage when you're washing your hands afterwards. Spend a bit of time doing some breathing. Spend a bit of time going for a walk, having your cup of tea. The sorts of things that you will learn about yourself that help to bring your physiology down, help you to be more relaxed, help you to be calm, but interspace them throughout the day. And the third and equally important thing that we can do that is a physiological regulation that helps to regulate us is actually to socially connect with somebody, but we need to connect with somebody that is in an open and engaged state. If we're connecting with somebody that is in a fight, flight or freeze and collapse state, then actually it's a bit stressful for us and it will bring up our physiology a little bit. If we, however, connect, we've got this wonderful thing called mirror neurons in our brains. If we connect with somebody that is in a calm, relaxed state, even again, checking in with that person for a minute or two, that helps us to relax. The neuroception again of scanning that person brings our physiology down. So really would encourage you, as I say, it's something that perhaps people are not as aware of as they should be. It really makes a huge difference in terms of that physiological, staying within our window of tolerance, being able to be that secure base, that self-care, that looking after ourselves, do those wonderful things in the holidays and weekends, but actually use some of those physiological breaks, the ones that work, try different ones, find the ones that work best for you, use them throughout your kind of day, speckle them in, ideally do them with the children, young people, make them social, do them with. And in an ideal world, we get the young people to practice a whole range of things of those sorts that we've just talked about. They therefore get to learn the ones that work for them. So when they are in a situation where things are going a bit wrong and they're getting dysregulated, we can take them aside and we can encourage them to use the breathing activity that they've practiced, or the rhythmical drumming, tapping activity, the grounding, sensing things in the environment, whatever it is that they found that works for them. If they've practiced it before they need it, all the better, isn't it? There's a lovely quote about not waiting until the child is drowning to teach them to swim. If we've got children and people that struggle with regulation, then let's teach them to regulate. Let's do that proactively. And then when they do need that, hopefully they can use it proactively and be less likely to need it. But equally, they've got some strategies to use. So when they are dysregulated and having time in with us, again, that comes from Louise Bomber. If a child is dysregulated, we need to ideally give them time in with a trusted adult rather than time out on their own. They need time in to regulate. That taps into the social connection part of the physiological regulation break. And sometimes it's enough for a child to have time with an adult regulating, just time with a caring adult. Actually, sometimes they need something a bit more active. They might need some breathing. They might need some somatosensory physical activities to help, again, them just regulate. And the bit that I'm going to share, but I think it'll be quite small on your screens, is there's a fabulous resource which I can put links to from psychologist Karen Treisman. It's called A Therapeutic Treasure Deck of Cards. It's available on Amazon. Apparently there's other shops too, but who knew? So the therapeutic treasure deck of grounding, soothing, coping and regulating cards is a whole series of cards that you can use with yourself, with colleagues, with children, young people, and it's a whole pack of different sorts of activities, physiological regulation that people can try out, see which ones work for them. It's a fabulous resource, so that might be something that you want to consider investing 20 quid in. It's a good resource. Okay, let's see where I was going next with that. I need to do it on the pen. Okay, so a couple more bits about messages about our own well-being, and then I'll stop for questions if that's okay. So I've talked already about us needing to be the secure base. We've talked about needing to reconnect, regroup and reorientate. So actually the same as we need the children, young people to reconnect with school, to regroup and reorientate, we as staff need time to reconnect with our team, to reconnect with school, to regroup and reorientate. The pictures that hopefully aren't too alarming for you on the side of the screen there is just to remind us that physiological states are contagious. Actually, if we that green, open and engaged, calming within our window of tolerance, the mirror neurons and the neuroception of somebody scanning us, they will be able to be calmed by that. A dysregulated person can never calm anybody. That's the bottom picture when we're pushed out of our own kind of regulation zone, our own zone of tolerance, our window of tolerance, and actually that's when difficult things can often very much happen when you've got two people that are both in their fight, flight, or their freeze and collapse states, and all sorts of terrible things can happen at that point. We need to be the ones that stay calm. We need to be the ones that bring that calm and that presence. I've made that sound super simple. It's going to take a lot of effort at this time when we won't necessarily naturally be feeling calm. We won't necessarily naturally be in that open and engaged state. So the sorts of things I've just talked about in terms of those emotional regulation breaks and the other things we can do in evenings and weekends to do our own self-care, enormously important that we redouble our efforts with those. I think we've probably covered most of the other things on that slide kind of going forward. So again, once we've re-established the relationship with children and young people, and we've re-established the relationship amongst staff, we also need protected time to come back together as staff to continue to be that secure base. And I think on the next slide, I have just put some examples, if it will let me do that. It's interesting it works. There we go. It's gone forward too far now. You're right about the delay, Aziz. I should have listened. Just go back a couple. Sorry about the seamlessness of that. So just some examples of the sorts of things that we need to do as staff teams to look after our own well-being. We need regular protected quality time for staff. Staff need check-ins with colleagues. We need to be the same as we're checking in with young people for 2 or 3 minute check-ins, with those kind of paceful interactions to help them feel valued and to feel cared for. We need to do that too. The kind of stopping and saying, how are you doing? How are you really doing? What's been happening for you? Allowing people to share, really, really key. Again, they don't need to be long, but they do need to be regular. We need various people checking in on each other and looking after each other. We need to think about self-care, increased downtime, those brief physiological regulation breaks that I've just talked to you about at some length. We need regular, clear communication. We all need to know what's happening. We need to be checking that communication more than ever. We need to make sure we're questioning people have understood, inviting feedback. We need to be reviewing, planning, changing things together. We need ongoing staff professional development, whether that's looking at the trauma course that I'm offering or other development. Let's keep that kind of going. And we need team bonding. We need time to come together and have fun. I know it probably doesn't feel necessarily like we might even feel guilty for having fun at this extraordinary time, but actually we really need that. It's very bonding, that playfulness, that fun that I've emphasised throughout this kind of webinar is a really important thing to make sure we do still do, and we do kind of move forward and celebrate with. Okay, a couple of quotes and I'll stop for some questions. A really long quote from Hayne Ginnett. Those of you who are as old as me might remember Hayne Ginnett. He was around in the 1970s, and actually the research from neuroscience and psychology has really, in the last 10 years, really reinforced how correct Hayne was. So I'll let you have a read of that quote, that he's discovered he is the decisive element in the classroom. I'll let you read that. It is my personal approach bit. I'll do that and shut up for a minute.
Sorry, and just say, would you mind reading through? Because I know we have a few people who have dialed in and won't to necessarily.
So I'm doing a wonderful thing. Look at the picture on the right hand side, and people are going, okay. Sorry about that. So yeah, I will certainly read it, and people will get these slides as well. So Hayne Ginnett basically says, I hope you're sitting comfortably because it's quite a long quote. I've come to the frightening conclusion that I am the decisive element in the classroom. It is my personal approach that creates the climate. It is my daily mood that makes the weather. As a teacher, I possess tremendous power to make a student's life miserable or joyous. I can be a tool of torture or an instrument for inspiration. I can humiliate or humour, hurt or heal. In all situations, it is my response that decides whether a crisis situation will be escalated or de-escalated, and whether a student is humanised or dehumanised. Long quote. I don't usually put quotes in quite that long, but it's incredibly powerful. So, you know, we can be that person that makes all of that difference. Bruce Perry sums up pretty much the same thing in a single sentence. He talks about a dysregulated person can never calm anybody, so we need to regulate ourselves. And Louise, again, wonderful quote from Louise Bomber, we need to put our own emotional oxygen masks on first. So we need to look after ourselves to make sure we're in a place to be able to look after the children and young people. Aziz, I was going to pause there for questions. Is there anything that is coming up either from yourself or other people at that point, or shall I rattle on? Don't know if you can hear me, Aziz. I can't hear you at the moment.
Sorry, mic was off. People were just asking about just detailing any of the resources that you had referenced, but I don't know if you had a slide on that towards the end that you were going to come back to.
Yes and no. They're all referenced the online training course that I keep making reference to, but what I'll do is, if it's okay with you, because we're going to send out these slides, aren't we? I will just add a little bit of information to an additional slide. When you email us out to people, I'll add a couple of the psychologists that I've mentioned and a couple of their websites, and also the resource that I've just made reference to, so people can find that. If before you get the email from Aziz you want that, then they are referenced at the end of each of the online training sessions. There's a signposting section, and then that references various resources. So if you go, which I will refer to in a minute, in signposting to the online training course, pick the session that is most relevant to you, and then, so if you want to find the Therapeutic Treasure cards link to Amazon where you can buy it, then actually go to this session that is about what about when it goes wrong, that literally got published yesterday. Go to the signposting section of that, and there's a link for it there. But if Aziz, is that okay? That would work, wouldn't it, for me to give you some more information to send out?
That's perfect. Yeah, thank you, Ian.
That's a really useful question. Hopefully people will find that useful. As I say, I'm hoping all of this will be useful to people, in that some of it will be reassuring, which is great. Some of it equally might be some things that people need to think about, maybe doing slightly differently or doing more of, all of those bits going forward. Okay. Any other questions, or shall I keep going?
I think you can keep going in for now, thanks.
Okay, really happy to do that. Okay, so what we've hopefully covered in that hour or so, and people have listened very patiently, so thank you for that, is I've talked very briefly about the harbour's journey. We've talked about the transformative power of feeling safe, the kind of polyvagal theory, and that information, as I say, there's more information available. So that's the first session in the online course, so there's all sorts of information around that you can go to. There's also a really wonderful nerd night talk that again I'll send the link in the information that Aziz is going to send out, that is actually not by Stephen Porges, it's actually by Stephen's son Seth, but he does a kind of half-hour introduction to the polyvagal theory and explains really powerfully around, you know, what we can do to help people stay within that window of tolerance and not get tipped into fight, flight, freeze responses. There's also, we talked a little bit about rebuilding trust on the PACE approach, and that's the work of Dan Hughes. I'll include in those references, things get sent out to you, the website, Dan's website around PACE, but equally there's the second session in the online training course is all about that. I've touched on the importance of our well-being. Again, sorry to keep banging on about the online training course, but there's a third longer session of information with video clips and various other elements and self-review elements, etc., around our own well-being. And then what we haven't done as much is some signposting and some reference to some of the other elements of the PACE Plus approach. So on the next slide, I'll do some of those. So signposting, first of all, I've mentioned it a lot and it's not a commission, it's free, so hopefully it will be useful to people. If you like some of the things that you've heard in this last hour, there is a much more detailed online free training course with a series of sessions. I think there's about 7 sessions now. I'm adding to them every Tuesday. If you use that link, the Sigma Teaching School, you can either use that link or you can simply Google Sigma Teaching School, go to the website, look for the online learning. There's a series of tabs down the side and you can choose which of the sessions you want to learn more about. I would encourage you, but you don't have to, it's entirely your choice, to do sessions 1, 2 and 3 first. Session 1 is about the transformative power of feeling safe. Session 2 is about the PACE approach and building trust. Session 3 is about our own well-being. So they're the 3 that I've touched on briefly today in this last hour. I would encourage you to look at those first because they're the most important ones to have in place. After that, you can pick and choose the sessions that look most relevant to you. There's one about what we're about when it goes wrong and how we can support young people that become dysregulated. There's one about managing reopening schools and kind of some key considerations that we can make going forward. I'm about to do one about teaching new skills, social emotional skills that haven't been learnt yet. There'll be one on shame. There'll be one about the right intervention. There's a whole series of things in there that you can kind of access. Please do give me feedback. Let me know what's useful. Tell me things that you've got as best practice that I can share as well. There's all sorts of links through that you can make use of. So go and do those. The PACE approach, as I put on the right hand side there, the PACE Plus approach, I've touched on it today, but what I haven't had time to do is much about when it goes wrong or about teaching the new social emotional skills, and only a little bit about self-care. I didn't really get onto blocked care, sadly. If you want to know more about that, please do book yourself a place on one of the online PACE Plus training courses. I used to do PACE Plus training courses as kind of, you know, live events in sports halls, etc., in schools. That's obviously very limited at the moment. That will come back, but at the moment, go to the website or email Julia, and I'll put Julia's email in there as well, and she knows that. She's the person who'll take all those bookings. Those have been turned into online courses currently. So if you do in the autumn term want to do an online, what I will do is do a series of kind of twilight sessions over time. You can be involved in some much more detailed information. I will go slower, not much, but a bit, and I will cover a lot more. It'll be more interactive in terms of information about some of the things. If you want to know more, look at the online training, book yourself a place if you want to on a PACE training course. I've put my email in there as well. I'd welcome any feedback. I am literally going nowhere at this moment in time, so if people do want to email with questions, comments, thoughts, you can do that through Aziz. You can come directly to me. That's entirely up to you. And I will stop in just a second. You've been very patient listening to me for a long time. I just want to restate what I said right at the beginning. We have an opportunity at this time to become even more caring and even more inclusive communities. We can further develop our trauma-informed approaches and interventions. As I said, I'm not suggesting for a moment that we're all going to be traumatized as a result of what's happening currently, but actually for those young people who are and those colleagues who are, we absolutely need to use these approaches and interventions. Some of them are quite simple, but they're enormously effective. But equally, they're good practice for all children and young people. They are trauma reducing rather than trauma inducing. Let's make an effort to do that trauma reducing by using those approaches, and especially by thinking about our relationships and the messages of safety and the messages of trust we're giving through those paceful, especially the non-verbal elements of our communication. It really is about relationships. Aziz, that's me done.
Ian, thank you so much. That was incredible, and really insightful to hear some of those strategies to support young people who may have experienced some form of trauma. We do have a couple of questions that have come through. So I'll just put forward one posted by Rebecca Blythe, who says, any advice for supporting children who refuse to share what they've experienced / are experiencing due to fears that their parents will get in trouble?
Yeah, really, really interesting thing. Was that Rebecca? Did you say?
That was Rebecca, yes.
Great question. And it's really challenging, isn't it? We clearly need to be respectful. The work of Louise Bomber again would suggest that we need to provide the opportunity for children and young people to share things with us. They will need at this time to, and this again, the online course goes into more detail, they will need the opportunity to share their experiences with us, but we can't force them if they don't want to for whatever reason, and that might be because they're frightened to be able to talk and share. We can be more creative, perhaps. We can find ways through metaphor, through story, through creative ways, as well as people telling us things. We can get them to show us things through, we can use videos, we can use films, we can use different ways of getting things talked about. But most young people, if we provide that trusting, that safe, that opportunity to be somebody they can listen, that will listen to them, most young people will. We just need the very act of reaching out and wanting to hear from them is really powerful. With some children, young people, Dan Hughes would talk about wandering aloud. So actually, for some children, young people, an approach you might want to use, but you'll have to make your judgment as to whether this is right for the right children, young people. You need to bespoke it. When a young person is not speaking a great deal, we might be making commentaries and saying, "I wonder what that's about. I wonder if this might be," and you're looking for their kind of non-verbal responses. You have to have quite a good relationship with the young person to use that. It has to be quite trusting, and it mustn't be judging. It must be without kind of evaluation, but just wondering and seeing if they respond. Oh, when I said that, you kind of, and then actually, if I'm getting it right, maybe you might choose to give me a little signal, a little thumbs up. I was like, oh, I can see you kind of smiled then. We're slowly just trying to give that wandering aloud, giving opportunities. I guess that, I think that. Louise Bomber would even commentate. She would even say, oh, actually, at that point, I can see that your leg became really, I wonder if your body's trying to tell us something. Is there something that, and all the time, the message we're giving when we're listening to children and young people is that we're here to help. We can be trusted. We just want to know. We can help better. The language I use with children and young people is, I'm here to help. I'm going to have to make some guesses if you don't share with me. I'm not very good at guessing. So it would be really helpful if you could help me with a little bit of information to steer towards what's going to work, what isn't going to work. But again, just in all of that, take a little bit of pressure off yourself. We don't have to have the solutions. What we do need to provide to be trauma informed is we need to provide a caring, empathic, paceful, listening ear. We need to be that fellow traveller, that key person that listens and asks questions and shows curiosity without it feeling like an interrogation, that shows that we care about the children and young people. We don't have to have a solution. Actually saying, gosh, I'm really glad you shared that with me. We're going to need to think about, how we're going to work this through. Some stuff in the latest session I've just published online about kind of what about when it goes wrong, slightly depressing title, but what about when it goes wrong? Talks about a fabulous thing called the collaborative problem-solving approach. It's a 3-step approach of working with children and young people to solve problems with them. I'd encourage you to have a look at that. So there's definitely things we can use, but most of all, the first answer I gave is be respectful. Actually, if children and young people really don't want to share, just say, okay, I get that. If you don't want to share, however, I'm here to help. I do want to listen when you're ready. Let's try and have a conversation. Sometimes actually they can communicate a huge amount through their non-verbals and the ways of us guessing. And yeah, I've said that. Sorry, rambling answer. Great question.
No, that's great, Ian. And thank you for that response as well. Those are all the questions that have come through for the moment. So just want to say a huge thank you to you, Ian, for your time and for sharing those resources and knowledge. I think, as you mentioned, what we'll do afterwards is just share some of those links, the slides, and particularly to your online training for those other areas of CPD. I know that there's been some comments of people really interested to find out more about that. So that's great.
Yeah, while I'm on the screen big, perhaps I can show the resources a little bit better. Can people see that perhaps a little bit better in terms of the resource? Karen Traceman does a whole range of different resources. They're all good, but genuinely this is the one that I find most useful, the grounding, soothing, coping and regulating cards. Use them for yourself, use them. It's just an opportunity to try out different things, that see how they work for you, try them out with different children, young people, build them into the routine. That's a really powerful kind of resource. She does lots of other wonderful books, etc. So once you start getting into buying her resources, you'll probably spend a lot of money, but that's probably a great place to start. I'll signpost some websites and some books and things as well, Aziz, shall I, in terms of sending out to people?
That's great. Yeah, anything that you could share in would be fantastic, and I can follow up with all the attendees from today. Really, really useful. Just before we do wrap up, I'm just going to take over from you, Ian, just quickly. Just to say, 1 second. I'm just going to try and present my screen quickly.
You're making it better with these. It isn't just me with the technology then.
Let me just want to finish just by saying a few words about what we're doing here at Challenge Partners to support schools across our network. And obviously this kind of virtual webinar leadership session is one kind of way that we're continuing to support schools. And we do have a range of other kind of online CPD opportunities coming up across the rest of the summer term. So you can check those out on our website, challengepartners.org. And we've also got some other recorded webinars that we've done previously. So things looking at the behavioural insights team, looking at how best to engage young people and parents in online learning. We have work from Mark Rowland about supporting disadvantaged people. So there's a whole range of resources on our website at the moment that we're looking to continue our peer support and knowledge exchange, which is really the key crux of our kind of ethos at Challenge Partners. Just to say, we are a network of schools that are kind of combined by a kind of shared passion and enthusiasm to improve the whole school network. So if you would like to find out more about our network, about joining, we are obviously looking to onboard schools for the next academic year. And then please do email me directly. That's aziz.ziria@challengepartners.org. You should all have my email. Or as I mentioned, you can visit our website, challengepartners.org as well to find out more. And we'll be sending around info about our future virtual events as well.